Good morning. Thank you for joining Fringe Benefit Plans Legal Update. We are excited to present valuable guidance focused on today's interesting and exciting employment environment. I am pleased to introduce Nathan McCoy, an attorney at Wilson McCoy, to help us navigate and mitigate risk. Nathan, thank you for joining us this morning and always being a strategic partner to Fringe Benefit Plans. We're committed to education and communication. So we are very interested in hearing what you're going to share with us today.
Well, thank you, Tina. I appreciate that, as always. Well, good morning, everyone. As Tina mentioned, I'm attorney Nathan McCoy with Wilson McCoy, PA, and today's legal update is it's very timely. In fact, I've entitled it "Staffing During Mandate Mania." So, the idea behind today's presentation is really looking at and sort of delving into the problems that a lot of employers are experiencing right now in terms of being able to staff properly, especially in light of now with increased mandates. So we'll get into that in just a moment, but I did want to give a little bit more of an introduction, of course, about myself. I'm with Wilson McCoy, PA. We focus primarily on employment law and business law. So we help employers and employees with pretty much any aspect of the employment and employer and employee relationship. As I always tell people, there's always employers and always employees and always disputes. So we're here to try to help, both sides, mitigate those relationships and make sure things are running smoothly for businesses here in Central Florida. Okay, with that said, let's kind of just jump right in. Tina, are you ready to go?
Yes, absolutely. We are ready to go.
Okay. All right. So here we are, 18 months later with COVID, and it remains a threat to our labor market. And, I've put up some statistics that we'll kind of go through, but it continues to impact all businesses across the nation, especially here in Central Florida. The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that there were 83 unemployed workers for every 100 job openings. That's an incredible number at this time. And to make things worse for employers seeking to fill these vacant positions, millions of Americans are quitting their jobs each month in what has been dubbed by multiple people within the media as the Great Resignation, or in the industry. And some of you may have already experienced that. You're seeing it, and again, it's just generally hard to retain employees at this point in time. I'm sure most of you have heard of it. Indeed conducted a recent poll of 750 recruiters, managers, and decision makers from diverse industries across the U.S. And they have indicated that over 74% of those surveyed believe that the Great Resignation is a real and present danger, to their businesses. And of that amount, 41% believe that resignations will remain unusually high well into the future. And I would agree with that, especially in light of the mandates. And we'll touch on that here in a second. So going further into this Indeed survey, there are, just one second. This Indeed survey, we want to know more or less, or what Indeed was trying to figure out was, why are employees leaving organizations? Why are they heading to that exit door? The very first thing is issues of higher pay. And I'm sure, as you can imagine, in this very, very competitive market, one of the ways you get employees to stay is to increase that pay. But then, of course, it creates a problem for most employers, especially smaller employers, is because it's now a bidding war. Other things, though, that don't cost as much, you have schedule flexibility. So you see that 58% of the people indicated that's one reason why they left. There's a better work/life balance that they're seeking. They're looking for remote work options and the ability to focus on personal and family life. Those are all considerations as to why people are leaving. Other findings that are pretty significant from that Indeed poll: 85% of employers agree that the pandemic has altered beliefs about what constitutes a good job. A lot of people are questioning that because of COVID, and they're really thinking, okay, I'm spending most of my time at work. Is this a place that I want to be? So they're really looking at that. 86% of the respondents believe employers need to take action now to reduce further churn. 76% say resignations are contagious. Once you have one, then the floodgates kind of open, and more, of course, leave the organization. 86% of employers say they should be more worried about resignations now than in the past. I think we can all agree with that. And this is one I highlighted, which I think is pretty important. 51% of those surveyed believe that their company's handling of the pandemic have resulted in later resignations. I hear that from a lot of our corporate clients right now. That's a huge issue, just in how those things are happening, how you've handled those. And really sometimes a lot of this is out of the control of the employer. They're trying to follow mandates, and it's a good segue into kind of where we're going. So the question is, how is your business handling COVID-19 in light of mandates? What are the new mandates? Well, I'll get into that here in a second. Are your practices in compliance with the recent mandates? A good question is, can you mandate vaccines if you have less than 100 employees? And how will mandates impact hiring and retention? If you haven't, been paying attention as much to the news as recently, the new mandate, the one that we're kind of focusing on for part of this presentation, is the path out of the pandemic. That's the most recent. It's POP is what I'll refer to it here moving forward. The intent behind POP is that it's an action plan that's been devised by the Biden administration, and the intent is to vaccinate the unvaccinated, further protect those who are vaccinated, keep schools safely open, protect the economy or the economic recovery, improve care for those with COVID-19. All great intentions, at least on their face. However, there are a lot of issues that are unresolved at this point in terms of regulations. And we don't know for sure how some of these things are going to be carried out. And so we're waiting on some of the regulations to be issued. But generally speaking, POP applies to large employers, those with 100 or more employees, federal contractors, and healthcare organizations. For those of you that have 100 or more employees, the mandate is suggesting that employees be vaccinated, or you provide them with the option to test on a weekly basis. And so covered employees also refer to those that are fully vaccinated, meaning not just one dose, but multiple doses, including boosters. One of the questions I have is, what type of test? That's unspecified at this time. Does it cover, the antigen, PCR, rapid, et cetera? I mean, we don't really know. We don't have a lot of guidance on that yet. The same thing for the method and type of documentation showing proof that somebody has either been vaccinated or they have negative tests. We don't know about that yet. Another intent behind POP is that employers must provide paid time off for those who are going to get vaccinated. But also, this is an interesting one. They also must provide time off for those who are recovering from the vaccination. So some of you probably have, who have been vaccinated, probably had no problems at all. But then there are others that or even you may have had or experienced, some type of repercussions after having the vaccination. So the intent of POP would say, if you're experiencing any type of, issues after receiving the vaccination, that you would still receive PTO or paid time off. The question, of course, is how long? Some of the issues that people have reported after getting the vaccination have been pretty time consuming, things that have lasted, quite a while. So for employers, they're kind of stuck here right now, not knowing what that means to them and how much is it really going to cost them in terms of providing paid time off when, the regulations don't really specify. I put down some general FAQs, about POP, so we can kind of run through those real quick, and they may be pertinent to your business. But the first one, under the proposed vaccinated or test requirement for companies with 100 or more employees, can private employers adopt a stricter approach and mandate COVID-19 vaccinations without a testing option? So the answer overall generally is yes, that can be done. You don't have to implement the testing portion. But the problem with that is that could run afoul of both the ADA and Title VII. In other words, if an employee makes a request for an accommodation of saying that they can't actually take the vaccination, they would rather just do tests in general to prove that they don't have the virus, that can be an accommodation under the law. So we've got to be mindful about that. And speaking of those accommodations, we're looking at, what about the vaccination acceptance for disability and religious accommodations? Well, those statutory exceptions still apply despite this mandate. Those statutory exceptions will be there and continue to be there, and so employers need to be mindful of those and allow employees to apply for those exceptions or request accommodations. But this is what the employers can do to review those requests for accommodations. Under the ADA, in Title VII, there are legal limits such as the proposed accommodation. They can be denied if there's an undue hardship or significant risk of substantial harm to the health or safety of other employees. Well, it's interesting because in this environment, you would say generally, well, COVID-19, of course, is a threat to others. Yes, that may be true. However, a lot of employers at this point in time have coped and have been able to mitigate concerns about that by doing some type of accommodations, meaning remote work, masking policies, et cetera. So you've got to balance those when looking at these issues. And as I put in here, you need to tread carefully. You need to make sure that you're just not generally denying accommodations because you want to say that it's an issue of safety or it's going to be an undue hardship because of cost. You've got to really weigh these decisions and make sure that it applies to your business and applies to each situation on a case-by-case basis. Otherwise, you could be you could face a lawsuit, and we'll get on. We'll be able to discuss those a little bit here further. Some additional FAQs, and this is I think a very good question. Is we've seen about the mandates or vaccine mandates. Should someone who has antibodies be required by an employer to actually have the vaccine despite actually having those antibodies? And right now this POP doesn't actually address that, and I do think it's something that should be addressed. I mean, logically, we're looking at this and saying, yeah, that would be a good exception, but it's not in existence yet, so we haven't seen that. Will employers be required to pay for the cost of COVID-19 testing for employees who opt for weekly testing instead of receiving the vaccine? I would say that, again, it's not really addressed yet, but it's likely that employers will be required to pay it. There are a lot of states that actually require, for instance, like California, they do require that expenses such as this be paid for and be borne by the employer. So, if you're going to institute a policy that has this or mandates, there's a good chance that you're going to have to cover that cost because it's a requirement of the job. So just be mindful of that kind of looking forward. And again, I would also note down here for the legal side of things that the EEOC and ADA guidance suggests that employers must pay for those testing as a medical examination. Further FAQs, can employers still provide incentives to employees to receive the COVID-19 vaccine? Absolutely. That's something that's been done even prior to POP, and it's something that, as an attorney, I would encourage employers to use if that's what they want. If they want their, employee population to be vaccinated, that is something that they can do. And oftentimes there is not a disparate impact or anything discriminatory about that. So if that's what you're trying to do for your organization and you want that vaccine level to be up for your employees, certainly you can do that. What about unions? A lot of our clients have unions, and the question is, must you bargain over the vaccine requirement? The answer to that right now is a yes. And the reason why I say that the answer right now is because it's a subject of litigation, just as a lot of these topics are. But as of now, the way that the NLRA, National Labor Relations Act, is written, it is a mandatory bargaining subject because it affects the terms and conditions of employment. An employer can still require, some level of vaccine mandate, but even if it is required under applicable rules, there are still parts that must be bargained for in terms of, like time off to actually receive the vaccine and whether someone's going to be paid for that. Those are all mandatory bargaining subjects. So bear in mind that even if this, POP moves forward and we have the regulations, that's still going to be an issue moving forward. All right, so now that we talked about that, the question is, those are for larger employers. What about those that don't have 100 employees? Can you still require employees to receive a COVID-19 vaccine? As many employment attorneys have kind of voiced this, over the course of time, yes, you can, but the restrictions and exceptions remain the same. In other words, you still have to look at the ADA and Title VII when you're instituting these type of policies. You still have to provide accommodations, that are requested by employees, so long as there's not an undue hardship on your business. So, these are things that you have to analyze on a case by case basis. All right. How are employees reacting to mandates and denials of accommodations? Well, I think the answer is pretty clear based upon what I put on the screen. Lawsuits, 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 et cetera. We've seen a number of lawsuits kind of pop up in the last couple of weeks. The results right now are varied, and a lot of it depends on where you're at in the country in terms of a political spectrum. Are these red states, blue states, et cetera? But for example, in the state of New York, healthcare workers had challenged the mandate, the overall mandate that's coming, and sought an injunction, but that was ultimately denied by the court up there on the basis of health and safety issues, really for not so much as the other employees, but also the patients that they're dealing with. So even though that it was denied, there are still those exceptions that we talked about earlier about Title VII and the ADA, which must be followed. Another case, there are pilots, flight attendants, et cetera, from United Airlines. They recently sought an injunction in the Northern District of Texas to prevent the policy which was issued by United Airlines to mandate vaccine for all employees. The issue there is that they would consider accommodations, but the policy itself, even if you had an accommodation, the policy itself was suggesting that employees, even if they had their accommodations granted, they would still be forced to sit on the sidelines and take unpaid leave until the company could figure out how those that are vaccinated could work safely with those that are unvaccinated. So that's why it's being challenged. The reason why is that many employees are indicating that, wait, for the last 18 months, we've been able to do this successfully. We've had issues in terms of wearing masks. It depends on the position, of course, on how much contact you're going to have with employees, other employees, or customers. And then there can be testing, of course, for instance, on the pilots. They can test either before a flight, a week before a flight, or even the day of. And if for whatever reason they test positive for COVID, they already have backups, for other pilots to fly the planes. So that's the reason why many of them have actually, filed for an injunction there. Another interesting case, the EEOC has brought an ADA suit regarding denial of accommodations to work remotely. Most employers have adopted policies to allow employees to work remotely, but then also they bring people back in. So when you try, for those that need an accommodation who, either can't have the vaccination for a religious or ADA basis, they are still wanting to work remotely. And so the requirement that everybody come back in can have an adverse effect on them. The next case that I see, though, is just an overall vaccine mandate for remote workers. How does it, or why does it really make sense if people have been working remotely for this entire time and they don't have any contact with either customers, clients, or other employees? Why is the a mandate policy being forced upon them when it's not really required for the job? So that's something that I think is a next big case coming, and I think that we'll see that pretty shortly. So the question is, what can you do based upon these new mandates? If the first thing is to determine whether or not this, whether POP applies to you. So you need to look and kind of count your own numbers. And here's one of the problems that you're going to face, though, is what does this constitute? Is it strictly an employee count, independent contractors, federal contractors, et cetera? Who counts? So that's something we're still waiting on some level of clarification. However, it certainly doesn't hurt for you to start doing your own due diligence to figure out where you fall when it comes to these type of employees. And if you haven't already, go ahead and review and update your disability and accommodation process and forms. I've done that for a number of employers so far, but you want to tailor it based upon your vaccination policy and testing. So you want to look at it again for your organization and create those policies and forms. You want to continue to draft policies, though, when you're making modifications that comply with the federal plans. Each state has its own, but bear in mind that, the federal seems to be coming out first. So you're going to have to want to tailor and pattern after the federal. Because of these federal plans, you're going to have to consider adding staff or, other support to address those that refuse to be vaccinated and you are refusing to actually accommodate them. That's obviously going to create some shortages for you, some additional resignations, et cetera. So another thing, because of that cost issue that we talked about, is you're going to want to research your local vaccination and testing options. What can you do in terms of finding vendors and getting pricing so you can actually budget for those type of issues. So now the next part I wanted to draw your attention to is that, remember that Indeed survey that I spoke about earlier. 51% of those surveyed believe that their company's handling of the pandemic resulted in later resignations. So for those that aren't required under POP, to create these type of policies and to actually mandate vaccination or go into testing, that's what we're looking at. If you're not covered by POP, you should consider whether you should adopt the COVID-19 vaccine or testing mandates, or develop a policy which fits your culture and business needs. And so what I mean by that is, you should know your workforce at this point. If you have under 100 employees, you have way more control over what's going to be required for your organization or not. So I would look at how much of your workforce is actually working remotely at this point in time. How much face-to-face exposure do the employees have with clients? Is it required? If it's not, you really should be looking at whether a global mandate is required. And if not, perhaps that's something that will make some of your employees happy. The fact that if they're working remotely, why force a mandate on them if it's not been an issue up to this point in time? That might keep some of those employees happy and prevent them from actually doing some type of resignation. Anonymous surveys, I would suggest at this point in time for a lot of your workforce. Again, if you're not required, by POP to actually issue some of these mandates, it may be helpful for you to issue surveys. Find out from your employees what their take on the issue is. You may be surprised by some of the results. Are you considering vaccination status when interviewing or hiring? One of the latest trends is for applicants to actually put their vaccination status on their resumes. We've even seen those come across even in our office. And so it's something, though, while kind of an interesting concept, I would warn any employer if they're considering that, in terms of hiring, at the outset. Why? Because of the adverse effect it could have on those who have sought an ADA or Title VII accommodation for religious spaces. Because you can always create, a lawsuit based upon that decision making if you've actually factored that in. So do be careful during that process, when looking at that. So, obviously looking at the situation, we're going to continue to see increased mandates, whether on a federal or state basis, but kind of balancing those mandates with, the hiring and retention policies that you have. A lot of it's going to depend on the size of the employer, but it doesn't mean you have to conform to federal policies that don't apply. Again, use your best judgment when creating your own policies to fit the culture of your organization. But do so in a way in which you're honoring the current statutes, you're following those, and allowing employees to request accommodation, and just be very careful when analyzing and making the determination of whether or not it's an undue hardship. I can't express that enough. That's something that needs to be done on a case-by-case basis. But that's the guiding light, if you ask me. When you boil it down to simplicities, that's really what you should be looking at those statutes and whether or not you can make those accommodations. You can apply that to any of the statutes or mandates, and those are always going to pass kind of the test of time. So kind of look at those and make your decisions based upon that. So that was kind of the brief overview of where we're at. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about either hiring or retention. Those are huge topics, again, especially in light of the mandates. So if anybody has any, Tina, you might want to moderate those, but I'm happy to answer.
Sure. And guys, if you want to put that into the chat feature, we can go ahead and make sure that everybody has ample time for questions and answers. Nate, I did get a question earlier today. And it said, would you be able to advise, I am aware that the tax break for small businesses ends on September 30th. Is there anything else in place? The problem is that we're running into teachers are absent from schools. Therefore, oh, here's the question right now. So for a 501c3 that has, hang on just a second. Bear with me. I'm looking for the question. I saw the question, but now I don't see it.
That's okay.
So
I'm
for a
imagining.
50 okay,
Yeah, go
there
ahead.
it is. Is there an anticipated FAQ release date, or do you anticipate 940 credits for any of the expenses like was done under the CARES Act?
Good question. I do. I think that once the FAQs or the regs come out, they will clarify that. And I do think that just because they are business expenses, there will have to provide some level of tax benefit to employers. So yes, I do.
Okay. What if an employee claims their performance challenges are due to mental health issues, which has become a big topic with EAP, employee assistance programs, during the COVID pandemic?
Sure. Good question. So with regard to performance issues, I mean, the reality is that you've got to maintain your standards, as an organization, but you also have to keep in mind and balance that with the mental, health of your employees. If someone has indicated it's a problem and they need an accommodation, obviously you go through that process, just like I mentioned earlier. You weigh that, in terms of the law of where does that fit? Can you accommodate the employee, or is this something that you just won't be able to get over? I mean, performance is always a basis, for making employment decisions, whether it's a suspension, any type of write-up, or even ultimate termination. So you got to be consistent across the board. Make accommodations when you can. So if somebody needs time off, right, for mental clarity or anything like that, that's something you can provide. But one thing I would suggest is that you do not lower standards. You want to make sure that people are doing the work that they were hired to do and they do it well. Those are things that are governed by policies and protocol of what's expected. And so those are things that must be followed, and you hold employees accountable. But you also give them time if they need time off, to acclimate to what's going on with their situation, so that they can actually get there and they can still continue to perform. So that's kind of how I would handle that situation.
So we have a school setting where teachers are now out due to COVID for personal time off, but the schools are also having to incur the cost for substitute teachers. Is there anything in place at this time due to the tax breaks ending September 30th? How do those business models protect their budgets and their people?
Sure. Yeah. So looking at this, again, POP is intended, to cover some of these situations. It doesn't replace that, tax credit, doesn't answer that yet. But like I said, I do believe that ultimately there will be some clarification in terms of regulations. But until that time, happens, yeah, sure. I mean, a lot of schools are dealing with these type of situations where, employees are calling out and you're needing to hire substitutes. So naturally, there's an impact on the business. And especially the budget. So, POP should help in that regard, to a degree, because of the issues about providing PTO and time off for employees to get tested, or also to get those, to get the actual vaccination itself. But for those that are actually just calling out for COVID itself, that hasn't really been addressed by POP. So we're kind of in limbo when it comes to that. So we're hoping to get some additional guidance. But in the interim, it's one of those things where you have to look at your policies and what you've been doing up to this point in time. Maybe you're offering time off, which is unpaid. Again, the problem being is you have to balance that with, providing substitute teachers, which are paid. That's an impact on your budget. The only other thing to do, of course, is to require employees to actually use their current PTO, against that. It's not ideal. It could ultimately hurt you down the road in some cases. But that may be the only option if you're trying to protect the budget.
Thank you. So then you think that further guidance will be coming on state websites for employers that are impacted?
I do. I think, well, first of all, federal first, and then I think a lot of the states will adopt based upon federal. So either they will go along with what's been adopted federally, or they can, where they have the authority, will actually create their own state-based. So I do think that's coming.
Okay. For a 501c3 that has more than 100 employees split over 6 locations, are they required to comply?
Good question. And again, that's something that we're still waiting on clarification on the counting of employees in terms of the states. Because remember, under a 501c3, you can actually have different models. You can have those that have basically affiliates in other states, or those that fall under one umbrella under one 501c3. So I think there's going to be a larger analysis that's going to need to be done there, but you really can't do that until we get some further clarification from the government.
Perfect. And Nate, I believe that we said that this guidance would be coming, but is there an anticipated FAQ release date, or do you anticipate 941 credits for any of the expenses like was done under the CARES Act?
Yeah, I do think that there will be credit extended. What that's going to look like, I think it's going to model after the CARES Act. I really do. But I don't have a date specific for you. The reality is that even if I gave you one, there's a good chance it's going to get pushed back. We've seen that time and time again. The other thing is that there can be interim regulations and then additional that will be offered afterwards. So unfortunately, I just have to say wait and see. But I do believe that there will be additional credits.
Okay. We just don't know that yet. That seems like a really, really popular question. I'm scrolling all the way back. It looks like we have addressed the questions that are in here. Are there any additional questions? And Nate, are you getting any questions in your day-to-day, operation that would be of interest that we may not have hit on?
Well, one thing I would like to know from some of those that are, on the Zoom meeting here is how have you seen your business impacted by COVID in terms of, either are you able to retain employees? Are you, trying to hire employees? What does it look like for you? Because that was kind of the intent of this conversation, I think, as a whole. I'm curious to see how it's impacted those that are, on this chat. The reality is we're seeing problems across the board for employers, whether that's large, small, or even staffing companies, believe it or not. We're seeing it, just kind of as a whole. So I'm curious to see how people are handling, and maybe there's some tips they can share with each other to some degree. So please use the chat function if you can to kind of address some of that. And then while you're doing that or sharing some of that, I would say that, the issues that we're facing right now, again, it comes down to, mandates. Everyone since the dawn of time here has asked, is this going to be required? Can my employer require it? And again, the reality is that most employers can, but subject to certain limitations. My thought is goes against the grain of most employment attorneys because they're just very, I would say, I don't want to say robotic, but the answer is yes, you can, yes, you can, yes, you can. Okay, maybe you can, but my point is, should you, right? That you've got to look at that on a case-by-case basis and look at what you do as an employer, and does it fit your culture? Is it wise to do it? So that's the biggest issue, and that's why I want to address that today. So that's what we're really seeing, Tina.
Nate, a question that I've never received over decades in employee benefits is how do we manage our employees that during COVID, which everybody is assuming, started side hustles, and they're working their side hustles while they're working at home?
Right. Oh, that's an interesting, and believe it or not, yeah, I've seen that quite a bit recently. So the first place you go is check your employee handbook, and if you don't have one, you probably should. And that's a policy that you address. A lot of policies will say that there is no, in essence, moonlighting or second job that doing while you're being paid by an employer. So that's a typical policy, but some policies actually say you can have another job so long as it doesn't conflict with your current job, or it's not a competition scenario. So you've got to check your own policies and find out how that fits. but it's kind of hard to babysit employees at all points in time when they're often working remotely, right? So, check your policies, and if you need to update those, you probably should. If that's what your intent is to curb any of that, second job or moonlighting, you want to make sure it's addressed, in your policies.
And Nate, as more and more employees are working remote with small children, can the employer have a policy that small children need to be at school during the business day?
Small children often are required by law to be either in school or, and that can mean, though, whether at a physical school or, of course, homeschooled, right? So, an employer can't really force somebody to have their children schooled at a typical physical location. That's just not the case. I mean, they can be homeschooled. Or to go through like virtual school. So that's not something I would recommend an employer attempt to do, because it's not probably going to go very well.
Okay. So we have some really exciting feedback from Carolyn, and they have 39 employees, and they've only lost one employee to a COVID issue.
Wow,
so the employee left.
That's impressive.
Very impressive. Good job, Carolyn.
Well, Carolyn, I would ask if there's, anything that you've done or changed, but within your organization that you could share for the good of the order. That's a very impressive statistic. So you're certainly beating the odds right now. So if there's anything that you feel like you can share as to what you all did or have done to keep that wonderful statistic, please do.
And Carolyn, if you want to unmute and share with everybody, you're more than welcome to do so. And then,
I'm here.
Hey, we would love to hear from you.
Okay, I will do that too. So, the size of our company is one thing, but the other is we're really employee focused on a lot of things, that their wellness and their health and their family and things like that really come before sometimes work. So that's the way we roll. And if they need to get out for family, or they need to do something for whether it's getting a COVID shot or whatever, we're pretty flexible. And I think that flexibility and just the general attitude of the office is really been has lowered any kind of turnover through all of this. And anyway, so that's been good. What was I going to say? Because we have stayed open through everything. We didn't shut down for a day. We've let, we have a group of people that were already set up remote. We asked them to be remote the whole time versus just coming in part-time, so that there was less people in the office. And then the only people we had go remote is if they had serious health issues during some of the severe times, then we set them up to be at home remote. But otherwise, we asked everybody to be in the office nonstop. So, but we're still considerate. So.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you, Carolyn. And so on that, it sounds like, again, you said employee centric. So, what I'm hearing from that too is that, regardless of what perhaps some of the local regulations or anything like that would require, if an employee needed something which you weren't required to do, it sounds like you still accommodated the request just because of your overall employee first mentality. And that seemingly has been the best type of policy that I have seen for most employers. So, kudos to you and your organization. I think that's a good way to keep your employees happy, and loyal to an organization. That's kind of how we maintain it with our people here too. And I would recommend that if you can, if your organization can do that type of, employee centric or employee first attitude, I think it goes a long, long way. So good job.
I do too. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. And Nate, something that we've been hearing from a lot of employers is that, remote works for some employees, but not for everybody. So understanding accommodation and flexibility, how do employers appropriately monitor the employees that have been deemed okay for virtual work versus those that maybe their job description or their skill set does not support the business with virtual work?
Right. So the first thing I would say is, again, you got to go back to your policies and what you're creating, what you're allowing, but always hold people accountable. So, if you've got those that are in the office and that, perhaps they can't work virtually, they have their own standards, of course, on what they have to meet, their performance standards, and I'm sure there are performance reviews done for them. When people work virtually, you got to make sure that they're still hitting the same standards that they would have otherwise if they had been in the office. So consistency is key, whether they're in the office or out of the office. Performance should never suffer, right? So I would make sure that they're doing the hours that they're supposed to do, that they're making the sales that they're supposed to do, or the sales calls or quotas, et cetera. You can be somewhat accommodating, but at the same time, what we have found is a lot of employees that are working at home will tend to put in more hours just across, a larger time period. So maybe it's not a typical 9 to 5, but they might, log in a little bit earlier and then sometimes do a little bit of stuff later because they've been able to handle some of their personal matters in between. But in any case, you've got to hold them accountable and make sure that they're hitting those benchmarks for performance. So accountability, accountability, accountability. That's what you have to do.
Perfect. And as employee benefits specialists, we are very much focused on advising and reminding our employers to highlight and campaign the employee assistance program. Nate, are there any best practices for employers just to keep that information front and center for their folks?
Well, if you have an EAP plan, absolutely. I mean, it's something that can be a valuable tool, especially right now during this continued COVID environment. I mean, if people are issuing, like you had the question earlier about those that are saying that performance, may be an issue due to, things like that they're suffering mentally from, COVID-19 issues. I would suggest that if any employee brings that to the attention of an employer and you have an EAP plan, that you go ahead and provide that information to them. It may be something that they may do it confidentially, but it's something that can provide the requisite help that perhaps they are not going to need additional help from the employer after they get it. Hopefully they don't, but if they do and they need a formal accommodation under the ADA, then that'll be fine too. But that's what it's there for, Tina. I mean, you have it there. It's there to try to help people, and I think we all need to consider such things if we're having problems. So for those that do have EAP plans, good for you. And those that don't, I would suggest that you consider it, especially if you have employees that are having some issues right now.
Thank you. It's very interesting what we're seeing right now with schools, and Trish is on with Building Hope, and she assists multiple schools with hiring and onboarding. And as we all know, it's a national crisis trying to find teachers. It's now just as difficult to find substitute teachers. So as we watch certain business models make different creative decisions to fill in the gaps with this labor issue, I know as a parent of a charter school, I have received communication saying, hey, parents, we need substitutes. Are any of you willing to go get the certification from the district so that we can call on you to support our classrooms when our teachers aren't here? Nate, if the schools are going through this and we have a labor shortage and it's affecting every industry, what advice or counsel can you give to employers if they have to get creative to make sure that all of their documents are in order, if it's not just a typical W-2 or a 1099 agreement? What trends can we anticipate?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think that's, when it comes to staffing for schools right now, especially those that maybe, let's say charter schools or any of those that, have more flexibility than some of the traditional state-based or public schools, there are things that can be done. You can do things with even at-will employment contracts, incentives that you can put in for teachers that perhaps, maybe they're going out if they had incentive otherwise, maybe they don't. But there are a lot of things that you can do, with contracts and additional policies. So, I would suggest that if anybody has any of those type of questions directly, which are pertinent or unique to their organizations, that they give us a call. I mean, we'd be happy to help to find a solution for them. But there are plenty that are out there. Like I said, in terms of other incentives, for employees at schools, especially charter schools. So we can assist in that regard.
Perfect. Conchetta says, as of right now, we've not lost anyone due to COVID issues, but we're struggling with the tough labor market, just not enough seekers applying for positions. If we had to issue a mandate, that would cause a lot of issues for our retention, but they only have 78 employees. So at this time, they should be okay, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, POP again is for 100 employees. The only condition about that is that I don't know about that particular employer. I didn't catch what it was that they actually do, but we don't know the counting of employees right now. So if they're at 78 or so, I don't know if they also have any other contractors or anything like that. But if it's strictly 78 employees and they're not a federal contractor, there's a very good chance this would not apply. So, the issue is that you can determine at this point in time whether you want to have a mandate or not. And I would agree that, at this point in time, if you don't have to have one, perhaps, if you decide that you want to create one, you be flexible with it. I think that's going to help you retain employees and perhaps hire employees in a more efficient manner.
Wonderful. Carolyn, there was a question that they would like to know what your business model is.
In what way? In which? Where's my?
Just what type of business?
Question. We manage homeowners associations, so
okay.
it's a little stressful.
It sounds like it, because what we're also seeing right now is in a trend, and I don't want to get political, but what we're hearing a lot is that people are not very nice, and that has to be very, very challenging in the homeowners and the property management space. So we're here to support you if you need any additional support. But Nate, are you hearing that feedback as well? That
yeah, just in general, I would say as a whole, I think as a country and a nation, regardless of political status, I think people are tired. They're angry. I think people are becoming a little bit unreasonable. Overall, it's just the status overall of kind of where we're at with COVID-19. It's understandable to some degree, right? I think it's been tough on everybody. So, yes, I am certainly seeing that. And all you can do is just kind of push forward and deal with the situations in front of you as best that you can, of course. But yeah, it's definitely out there.
Awesome. Mary Jo at AG Morrow says that they are definitely also experiencing the challenge with finding candidates. Filling a couple of openings has been very tough. Most of our employers have been vaccinated. We've been more than generous in paying employees. We've been providing accommodations for COVID and remote as needed, and everybody except for one has returned back into the office. Jeanette says, we have 30 employees. We haven't lost anyone due to COVID. The company provided paid time off for the employees to get their vaccines, which is very nice. All employees are fully vaccinated. Combination of remote and on-site work to prevent anyone in the office at the same time. The office follows the CDC guidelines. Like most companies, we're having a real challenge finding candidates and filling openings with not enough candidates. So Nate, we're hearing this from every single business SIC code out there. I mean, here's the big question. We know that COVID had an impact, but where did our labor pool go? Does anybody know what happened in the last 18 months?
Right. Well, that's what's interesting. Unfortunately, as the statistics showed, a lot of people are just at home, believe it or not. They're just not working, or they're bouncing around, believe it or not, between jobs. That's really what they're doing. And a lot of them are ladder climbing for higher paying jobs. It's just, there's not a lot of loyalty at this point in time because those higher paying jobs are out there. So, some general advice I would say is that it's not necessarily that you have to increase your salaries, but I would suggest being a little bit more creative with like retention bonuses. So, if you get somebody in the door and they look like they're going to do a good job, it's not that you need to reward them with a higher salary yet, right out of the gate. You may be able to attract people there for a period of time. but, evaluate how they do once they're actually in the organization, and provide to them, or the opportunity, I should say, provide the opportunity for a retention bonus. If they get to a certain mark, give them a bonus. And then if they get to another certain mark, at that point in time, you can increase their pay. Because the last thing you want to do is get somebody in at a higher rate who's performing poorly, right? You don't want to do that. That just sets a sort of a bad precedent for you. So, to the extent that you can get them in the door and they seem like a good candidate, you offer them the job. Be a little bit more creative with what you do to reward them for staying, or once they actually get that a certain threshold and they're performing well, then you can increase the salaries, and they'll see that over the course of time as an incentive that will want them, or have them stay there. So I know it's hard, it's difficult, but that's what I would recommend a lot of times is creating that type of bonus or reward or incentive program.
Wonderful. Guys, I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to ask any final questions. This has been an amazing communication session. I think we're all kind of struggling alone in our own little, organizations with all of these questions. So Nathan, thank you as always for coming together to give us some guidance, give us some your lens on what is happening on the employer side, and always some tools to protect the organization in these times.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, well, guys, we will also be putting the recording up on the Fringe Benefit Plans website within the next week. Should you need anything additional, please let us know. We're always here to serve and support your organizations. Thank you all so much. Have an excellent day.
Bye, gang. Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan. Have a great day.
You too.